Good morning and welcome to our next nonprofit forum. Today we'll be talking about IT security awareness, and I'm delighted to bring to you Brian Shea. Brian currently serves as the Chief Information Officer at MedOne Hospital Physicians. He's also the president and founder for V Strategies, which provides virtual Chief Information Officer, Chief Technology Officer, and Chief Information Security Officer services. He's been in the IT field for more than 26 years, and it's primarily focused on strategy, infrastructure, operations, compliance, and cybersecurity. His leadership style inspires management and staff to become more innovative, accountable, results-focused, and consumer-oriented while still bringing enjoyment and excitement to his environment. I'm delighted to welcome Brian to the stage today, but before we do that, I'd like to cover a little bit of housekeeping. If you take a look at the bottom bar of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box and a chat box. Please use the chat box specifically for questions related to the operations of the forum today. So if you have questions around closed captioning or volume, that would be the place to leave those. The Q&A box is for content-related questions. If you have questions for Brian, that would be the place to add those. You can upvote any question that's currently in the box, which will help us know which is a priority to you. The Q&A happens towards the end of our forum this morning, and so we will take those questions from that box. If you need closed captioning, please note that there's 3 bubbles at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If you click those bubbles, you'll see a prompt to show subtitles. And if you click show subtitles, the subtitles will appear on your screen. You can change the size of those subtitles if you go to subtitle settings. And you can move those subtitles around the screen if you need to at any point throughout the forum. If you join this forum using the link in Zoom, you will not be able to have as much change to your subtitles. So if you use the link in the invite, you'll be able to change your subtitles. And with that, I'm happy to bring you Brian Shea.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Columbus Foundation, as well as all the individuals that have joined the webinar here this morning. It's a privilege to talk to you about IT security awareness. And I'm hoping to do it in, again, as the title kind of says, an approach for cybersecurity for everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and share some slides here with you as I talk through this. All right. So again, this, as we titled this, an approach to cybersecurity for everyone, is something that, and I'm going to go through a little bit of my background, which will help a little bit here set the stage of when I say for everyone. When I say everyone, it doesn't mean that it has to be large enterprise organizations or just small to medium organizations, and it could be individuals, right, as well. So my background a little bit, as you heard, I've been in IT a long time here in the Columbus area. So I think it's really going on 28 years now that I have been in IT here. And I've been in very large multi-billion-dollar organizations as well as very small organizations. So I think I bring a unique background to helping organizations think about how to implement cybersecurity into their organizations. And part of the goals here today are going to be going through giving a little bit of education, but showing how you or any organization of any size can start approaching building a security awareness program and culture. So some of the objectives we kind of touched on a little bit. So this is one of the things that I think is one of the big takeaways in here is creating a culture of IT security awareness. And what does that mean? As you can see, I have a little DNA symbol there to the left. So this is something that security is something that you can't just stop and start. It's got to be part of what we do. It's got to be part of everybody's DNA. So when I say it has to be a part of everybody's DNA, it means that it's got to be wired into your just of how you operate. And this will make more sense as we start going through, some of the examples and things to think about and how to implement. Is this just has to be like anything else. It just has to be another skill set that we have as individuals. You'll hear me use the phrase maybe throughout these slides that I use very commonly within my organizations is slow down to go fast. I know that sounds a little crazy, but the reality is when you slow down and you think about things, you can react in a lot better way. And that will make a lot more sense when we go through how some of these things are occurring. At the end of the day, it's, in any organization or even as an individual, it's really about protecting, customer data, company data, and employee data. Every organization that's on here is impacted. It could fall into any one of these buckets, right? Of importance. A lot of the organizations that could be on here, and even a lot of the organizations from my past experience have a lot of compliance and regulatory requirements. That could be financial, it could be healthcare, it could be government. So you have drivers as an organization that you must meet certain regulatory requirements and show that you're doing them. And it doesn't mean just checking a box, right? That I got this, so now I am now compliant. The fact is, it goes beyond that, right? You have to actually prove and show that you're doing it, especially if something happens. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But HIPPA, PCI, cyber liability insurance. I think anybody here that has cyber liability insurance has probably seen over the past couple years that the requirements for this are getting stricter. They're actually calling out specific technical safeguards that you must have in place to get insurance even for it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And again, at the end of the day, it's about continual risk mitigation. This isn't something that is going to stop. It's not something that's going to end. If anything, security risks because of complexity that's out there or different, influences in the world that are occurring, the risks are going to continue to be greater. Bad guys are going to continue to be bad guys, right? So we have to continually find ways to mitigate risk over time. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So where do some of these threats come from? So everybody's heard the term hacker, right? That you think of some guy sitting in his basement, hacking into systems and things. There's terrorist groups that are out there. And, some of this has come to the news, of course, a lot more recently with the Ukraine-Russia conflict and, a lot of alerts going out that there's going to be a lot more cyber attacks and threats and things occurring. Cyber criminals. So any bad guys, this could be militias, this could be cartels, this could be individuals that are looking for, financial gain. Competitors, this one's a little rarer, but there are organizations that, there are competitors that are out there that are trying to get proprietary information, intellectual property. You don't hear about this one as much. It's usually more targeted type attacks when those occur. Employees, so people are the number one threat within your organization. And it's typically not something that's purposeful, right? There's a very small percentage that somebody internally is trying to do something bad. The most of this occurs on somebody accidentally clicking on an email, clicking on a link. And that's the number one threat to most small to medium businesses or any business at the moment. And then third-party vendors. So all of us work with different third parties. It could be anything from your, a supplier, supply chain, or just providing a service to you. But whenever there's any of those type of communications and integrations or interactions between organizations, you now have to worry about that organization's security posture as well. So we'll talk, through some of these things and how these come together. But really, the main reasons for most of the attacks that occur today are cause disruption or financial gain, or both. So ransomware, you can see up here at the top, that's one of the #1 issues that most of us are dealing with today. And we'll go through how do you protect yourself a little bit from getting ransomware, and then what do you do if you get it? So data exploitation. These are the type of data points that the bad guys are typically trying to get. So personal identifiable information. So name, social security number, address, those things that are tied to more of an individual, right? So those data points, a lot of organizations have those in their environment. PHI, so in my world, being in the healthcare space for a long time, protected health information. So this could be insurance information. It could be diagnosis information, about you. It could be, credit card, even information within that, those data sets. Username and passwords, so this gets into, people are phishing to get a username and a password so that they can then access systems that you might have access to, and that could be both business or personal. Exploited systems. So when I say exploited systems, these are, or exploitable systems, are systems that maybe are unpatched. These can be computers, these could be phones, these could be servers, these could be applications. Things that are unpatched are things that are susceptible to being exploited in some way. And of course, company data and customer data. So there's very rich information in the data that is stored by a company. And company data could be HR information about employees. It could be a lot of different data points that are kept. And then same with customer data. And really, again, I call out little tidbits through here, but a lot of this information at its core is they're really trying to, identity theft, right? That's the big one. With a lot of this data, if they could get enough information to open a loan, open a credit card, do financial damage, they're going to do it. And they're going to look for the type of information that they can to be able to do that. Now, this is, we're going to start to get into the meat of it a little bit. So discussion points, right? So I'm going to give a little bit of education again, as I talked about on these different aspects and how they impact building kind of a security awareness culture. Then the bigger piece that we're going to spend some time on is the security maturity scorecard. This is how you as an organization can approach building the security awareness and moving into a program where these things are typically overwhelming, right? And a lot of organizations get paralyzed and they don't know where to begin because there's so many different technologies out there. There's so many different vulnerabilities that could be, had, that they don't know where to begin. So we're going to spend some time on that. So I kind of hope, the goal of this is if you can take away any tidbit through any of these sections, that's a win. And then we'll get into the weeds a little bit on helping you as an organization. And we'll start with social engineering because this is one of the big ones. You're going to learn really quick as we go through these discussion points that a lot of these will cross boundaries. So a lot of these buckets aren't just isolated to any one of these talking points because there could be multiple attack vectors throughout this. But let's start with social engineering. So the biggest one a lot of people hear about. So email and text phishing. Texting has been on an uprise. That from that attack point compared to email, they both are there. But it's really things to look out as everybody has seen this in some form or fashion within their organization, or maybe even been exploited by it. So an email appears to come from a coworker, a customer, or a vendor, and it's asking you to do something. So the big things to look out for those kind of things are, there's typically, sense of urgency. Hey, I need you to do something now. Or, you could look for key things in there. There's typically broken language in them. A lot of times you will see that they're coming from a personal email account. Those are usually triggers. So there's things to look at when you're getting these type of emails, but a lot of these today look valid. They look like an invoice coming from a vendor. They target a lot of accounting departments, accounts payable. And if somebody within your organization, what they're going to try to do is if they could exploit one person's, mailbox within your organization, they could get a lot more information. They could see what your email signatures look like, and they'll forge those email signatures. They could see if they could intercept a copy of an invoice or your letterhead. They'll start taking that information and using it against you and trying to communicate to others either within your organization or maybe your customers and sending that out so it looks legit. But there are things, again, this goes back to that slow down to go fast, right? So there's key things you could typically look for in those is, again, they're asking you to do something, right? They're asking you to react to something. So taking that step back and taking a look at that, questioning those things are critical. Social media phishing. So, everybody's on Facebook or, Twitter, Instagram, right? There's a lot of different social media platforms that are out there. There's a lot of, good that comes from those, but there's also a lot of opportunity as an attack footprint for bad folks, right? So big things to look for are, there's a lot of times fake online discount coupons, right? If it seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And if you click on those, you can download malware, ransomware, those different things to your system, mobile or computer. But social media is a big platform. And we're getting into this a little bit more as we go through. Phone calls. So there's been actually an increase in this recently of people phishing and via phone calls where they're calling you and trying to get personal information. Again, enough information given to them where they could use that to create an identity. And then physical social engineering. This one you don't hear as much about. We'll cover it because it's still a reality, but it's a reality in different forms within different organizations, depending on your industry, your locations, how your workers operate. But some people will piggyback in, to an office that might be secure, or shoulder surfing here is, when you're looking over somebody's shoulder to get information, see what they're doing, get username and passwords, those kind of things, but less common than some of the others. So email, as I said, email kind of is a subset off of the, the social engineering piece. Some of the big tidbits, is educating your staff, keep your work and your personal email separate. There is a lot of people that use their work email to purchase things and associate that email to retail purchases, signing up for different things. If it's personal, use a personal account. It really helps, just limits your exposure of your work email being out there in a lot of these databases that are being breached. It seems like every week you hear about some sort of organization that you might belong. It could be a college. It could be, as I said, a college alumni stuff, Amazon, you name it, that their databases are breached at some point in time. So ideally, do not use your work email for personal use and vice versa. Don't blindly open attachments from emails. Again, a large attack vector is the emails attachments that come in. So they're either going to come in via an attachment, it could be a PDF, it could be a Word document, it could be an Excel file. This goes back to that slow down to go fast, right? If you're expecting something, that's different. If you're not expecting something, open things with caution. Don't click on links that are suspicious or unfamiliar to you. And then we tell people to go to the source. So a lot of these attacks via email are timely. So we just went through tax season, right? There's a lot of fake IRS phishing attempts. There's Amazon Prime has Prime Day. The bad guys know that these different things are occurring and they will target those periods of time to send certain types of communications. So I tell people, if you are shopping for something, right, and you buy from Amazon and you get an email talking about your package and, and things like that, is just go to the source system, go to Amazon, go to those sites directly, go to the UPS site, go to the FedEx site, go to those websites directly, because that's where all the source communication is going to be. You don't have to open it and click on a link to get that. And this is, a lot of people have fallen for that and fallen for ransomware because of that. As we said, carefully inspect all emails. utilize email encryption when you're sending anything that's sensitive information. So a lot of people could implement technology, third-party technology or Microsoft technology to do this, but that way you can assure if you're sending any sensitive email, an email containing any sensitive information, that it's encrypted. So that means that if someone intercepts that email in transit, that they can't open the contents of it. Slow down. I'm not going to say that enough. Slow down. When you're evaluating your email, email is the #1 reason that organizations get ransomware. So it's that slow down and pay attention. And when in doubt, ask. This goes back to building that awareness culture. You want to make sure that everybody within your organization feels comfortable in asking about something. It's a lot better for them to come to you and say, hey, is this legit or is this real? Before clicking on it. So you've got to build that culture of it's okay to ask and not know. So web browsing, some of these things again go without saying, but don't click on unfamiliar links, from within emails. Don't browse to websites that you don't know that they're legitimate sites. Big things before logging into, if you're going to a site and entering information, make sure that site is secure, right? So if you're going to a shopping site or you're putting in a credit card or you're entering any kind of data into a website and it's a legitimate website, those sites should be encrypted. So you'll notice either the little S in the HTTPS in the URL, you might see the little lock, that's up in the address bar. Those are, you can click on those. Those are giveaways that those are secure. Not to say there aren't bad sites that can make it look like they are secure, but if it is not there at all, those are big giveaways that the information you enter might be going across the internet in clear text. So that could be passwords, credit card information, or other sensitive data. Another big thing is don't click on pop-ups. Ads, warnings, things that pop up. Those are, again, attack vectors that a lot of bad guys use. There's a lot of them that are out there. You can see the example in the slide is, fake things around security even, right? Hey, I detected a virus on your computer, or would you like to speed your performance of your computer up? And you're like, well, who wouldn't want to have my computer perform better, right? So it's clicking on those things can instantly take you to a site, download malware without you knowing, or worse, ransomware within the organization. So again, be careful what you're clicking on. Passwords. So this one has evolved really over the years in IT. Before, they used to tell you, change your passwords all the time, frequently. It was frequency that you should change them. Well, that is really flipped, and it's not really about the frequency, anymore. And most organizations and most individuals, as I said earlier, their passwords have been compromised or on some sort of database that's out there at some point in time. So it's safe to assume a password you have used has been utilized or compromised somewhere. The big things where it's really switched to is your passwords need to be unique. It's really about complexity and length. So I've seen a trend in a lot of people switching passwords to song lyrics because they can remember a song lyric. And that length is harder for tools to crack a password. So complexity and length are critical if you need to have a password. Keeping them secret. So, it's kind of funny to say, but it's, I've seen it all. A lot of people, write passwords down, or they put them in spreadsheets because they need to remember them all because there's so many passwords to so many different systems. So where things have evolved and changed a little bit with this to really help with it, and where higher level of security comes in, you've heard the term potentially multi-factor authentication, or MFA. This is a requirement. MFA is a requirement in a lot of cyber liability insurance policies, if not all now. And if you could combine the one below there, single sign-on, with multi-factor authentication, your reduction, I think Microsoft had an article, it was like 99 point something percent reduction in password type breaches when implementing just MFA. MFA is something that a lot of users have gotten used to now, right? So it originally started off with financial institutions when you log into your bank account or your 401k that you got prompted for MFA. Now it is part of our normal everyday life in most organizations. But if you haven't implemented, and we'll get into this in the how to approach, if you haven't implemented anything from a security perspective around passwords, MFA will reduce your risk dramatically because the fact that they have to have something, right? It's not 100% because people still can make mistakes with a device. But if you had someone tries to breach your password, if say you have MFA with your phone and they don't have that, they're not getting past that. Now, where people need to slow down, again, is you could have the application on your phone. Someone could have tried to attempt. You might get a pop-up that says, hey, you need to authenticate. And if you just blindly hit approve, not thinking of, oh, I didn't do that, they could get into your system. As I said, that's not 100%. But by putting that in, you reduce your risk as an organization greatly. There's a lot of cost-effective ways to implement MFA. So you don't have to go out and buy a really expensive MFA type solution. You can leverage Microsoft's MFA if you're a Microsoft shop. It might be a licensing uptick, but a lot more cost-effective to get it implemented. Password management. So this is another big one. With all these passwords, hundreds of passwords in many cases, right? That some people have. And, I get it. How do they remember those in their head, right? Do I put them in a spreadsheet so I can access that spreadsheet? Do I write them down, on paper? How am I supposed to remember all these? So passwords management tools have been around for a little bit, but they're actually becoming a requirement now in cyber liability insurance policies to prove that you have one implemented. And this goes beyond just the IT team needing a password management tool to keep all the critical passwords. This goes to your users. So your users should now have some sort of tool. There's lots of tools out there. It could be Lastpass or Keeper, or there's lots of them that you can put all these different passwords in and stores them in a secure way. And then they could be accessed and leveraged where you don't even need to know the password. They could be even a generated random password. But the way the software works, when you go to a website and you need to enter the information, it has a plugin that you could click on and it auto-populates that for you. So this is the way that you can manage those passwords in a secure way. And again, this goes back to that education of people to understand of, if I have a spreadsheet and I have it stored on my network and someone on my network, someone gets compromised, maybe you, that person now potentially has access to that spreadsheet with all those username and passwords. That might be to your critical systems. It might be your customers' systems. And they now have the keys to that. And they go one step further and can get that data. So password management is critical. Mobile devices. So mobile devices, this is your phone, a tablet. They're a computer, right? They're no different than a computer. In some cases, as we know, your phone nowadays is more powerful than the computers that were here years ago, right? So we need to make sure they are secured just like anything else within your organization. So they need to be password protected. They need to be encrypted. So the data, if the device is stolen, people lose cell phones all the time, right? They lose iPads, they get stolen, they get lost. So they could have critical data on them. They need to be encrypted. One of the big things I tell people is the operating system updates. If you're an iPhone or an Amazon, you get those pop-ups once in a while. It says, oh, you need to do an update. A lot of people are like, ignore, I'm not doing that now, because, oh, that's going to slow my phone down or what have you. If you don't do those, you are making your mobile device susceptible to vulnerabilities over time because there are security updates in those updates. We're not saying you have to do it instantly, but you have to have some sort of mechanism to make sure that your mobile, either as an individual, your personal phone is getting updated, or if they're business devices that they're getting updated. And that kind of leads into the next bullet. So leveraging mobile device management. So this is a technology that organizations can implement to help them safeguard the mobile devices. So making sure that there's, they're password protected, that they're encrypted, that, maybe they connect automatically to certain Wi-Fi environments in your organization, that maybe that, if they're lost or compromised, what actions you take. Again, there are tools that are cost effective to implement to do this. Some of this is policy driven. As an organization, you have to have good policies in place around this, but it shouldn't be a fear factor of, it's a personal device. I don't want any protection on the company looking at it and things like that. You could see the technologies that are out there, they sandbox those things. So personal could be personal, work could be work. The big thing is protecting your company information on those devices, on anything being stored or how it's being accessed. Don't download apps from unknown sources. So there's so many mobile device applications that are out there. Again, a lot of these applications are legitimate, but don't randomly download different apps to your phone without knowing what it is. Because again, a lot of these are used as attack vectors to gather information off your phone and transmit it somewhere else. Avoid public Wi-Fi. So, some of the big things are, going to, a coffee shop or wherever and connecting to their free Wi-Fi because I don't want to use my cellular service, so I want to use their Wi-Fi. Well, depending on how those Wi-Fi environments are secure, they could capture the data and the information and the traffic that's being sent across that public Wi-Fi. So they could get a lot of critical information. So if you're gonna do that, don't access sites that are sensitive, banking sites, work sites, those kind of things that have sensitive data or you're sharing certain username and passwords across it. Avoid those type of things on public Wi-Fi. It's a lot more secure to use your cellular service than it is to connect to the Wi-Fi. In most cases, a lot of people have unlimited data now, right? Or it's become so cost effective to not worry about the data plan versus Wi-Fi, that it's a lot more secure to connect to your carrier cellular than it is an unknown Wi-Fi. Physical security. So as I said, this is one that a lot of people don't talk about a lot of times, and it's evolved a lot, right? Especially with COVID and the remote workforce, because the barriers are really, you're not protecting office walls. You're protecting, could be across continents, right? With how we do this, but we're going to talk about physical security for a minute. Be aware of your surroundings. Make sure authorized visitors have properly signed in when they come into your office. Look for badges if that's something you do within your organizations. Tailgating, a lot of people will follow somebody in through the door. Someone will hold the door open for somebody because it's human nature to be nice, right? And they just let them walk right in behind. But in a very large organization, you don't know everybody. In a smaller office, you probably know faces and know people and stuff like that. So depending again on the office type and building and industry, this comes into play a little bit different. But out of this, let's just talk about a couple of these other key ones. So locking workstations when unattended. So it's like leaving your front door open and going to work. It's like leaving your car unlocked and going into the mall, right? You want to make sure at a minimum that you're locking your computer when you get up and walk away. And that's either via a safeguarded policy that locks it after a period of time, but better yet, it's teaching your staff to lock it as habit. And again, as I said, part of the thing that goes into the DNA of how you're wired, it's just a simple Windows L key, right? Or Control-Alt-Delete, and you can lock your system. It's just becoming habit, right? And educating people around you to do that. Sensitive paper documents or maybe electronic media, so if you're just getting rid of computers from your office, you need to make sure that they are disposed of properly. You need to make sure those hard drives are shredded. They might be encrypted now, which is one level of protection, but depending on how they're encrypted, sometimes that could be broken, right? So you want to make sure that you are properly disposing of any kind of media. Let it be paper or electronic. So sensitive papers, you might write, again, username and passwords, or maybe an account number, or any other type of sensitive information on a document that could be pieced together that somebody could use. This, again, maybe not as common of risk, but there are people that look in people's trash in office complexes to get information. There's people that look in individuals' trash to get information about credit card, enough information, again, to do something with it. either accessing company information or creating an identity so they can have enough information to get some financial gain. All right, this is the one where I wanted to spend a little bit of time over at least the next 10 minutes here is, I've kind of shared educational points, things just to think about as you go through, but what do you do as a nonprofit organization or a smaller organization with all these different attack vectors and all this technology that's out there? And you could have, vulnerability assessments done and pen tests done that are very complex and in many cases warranted. But what do you do? Like, how do you make this palatable? So I tell every organization, regardless of size, is you got to really kind of know where you stand. So creating a security maturity scorecard. This is something that should be simple, right? This is something that it should be a one-pager, potentially, and it has to be something that's clear from the leadership group down that is understandable of where do you just currently stand. It should be, potentially a red, yellow, green type scorecard. So red, you're not doing it at all, or, yellow, maybe you're doing it a little bit, and green, you're good, right? You've covered that area. And this covers everything from, the scorecard should cover everything from processes to technology stack to, people related things. So, and it could include everything from, endpoint protection. Everybody, that's an easy one, right? To grasp to, like, do I have antivirus on my computer? To, again, I said policy procedures. In education, is the people, what are you doing? And it should be in a way, again, that is, here's the key criteria around security best practices. And then what do you do and where you're at, right? And then you keep attacking those things. This is hard, right? From a resource perspective. Small to medium businesses have the same risk, the same concerns, the same issues that very large, multi-million, multi-billion dollar organizations have, but they might not have the same resources to address them internally. All these organizations, staffing is hard across all industries right now, even tech, right? So, and that's been that way for many years, but they're finding cybersecurity folks is tough, right? And how do you do that? So, I recommend leveraging partners, right? Using a managed services partner or a managed security partner, finding someone that has helped organizations that have the skill set, that have the tool set, that give you the economies of scale that you couldn't afford to do this on your own, that you could work with to help you navigate this, help you build that scorecard, help you look at how do you leverage technology stack, right, to minimize the risk, even the education aspect. And it's really about continuing to close the gaps over time. It's a journey. So you're not going to be 100% compliant. There's new security things popping up all the time. There's new technology, the new widget that's out there that does, XYZ, for you, and it's going to answer all your problems. Well, you'll quickly learn it's not, like jumping down. It's not just about technology stack, right? It's really about people, process, and technology, and they must all align to really build a good security awareness program. So that means from the people aspect, they got to be engaged. It's got to be part of their DNA. You've got to be teaching people, from the day they walk in the door, they need to be learning about security, right? And how to protect themselves, what to look for, what to ask. There's processes in place. So, on the technology side, there's these audits and reviews that we do. And then there's technology, right? So heaven forbid, the big thing how you want to leverage technology is, how do you prevent something from occurring? Heaven forbid it happens. What technology do you have in place to mitigate what's just occurred or remediate what's occurred? So, ransomware, for instance, someone clicks on, ideally you have something in place that's scanning email coming in, looking, detecting for ransomware. If it still happens, okay, now maybe you've clicked on something. Is there something in place of, I clicked on it, now it doesn't allow the ransomware to occur? Or if it actually happens, how do you recover from it? So, having good backups, actually making sure you are backing up your critical information within your organization, and not just backing it up, that you could actually prove you could restore it. And then what data is critical to you to maintain your business? Because at the end of the day, when these ransomwares occur, you're either going to have to pay to get your data unencrypted if that you have no other way of having data restoration from backups. So that's critical. Cyber security insurance. So requirements are getting stricter, as I talked about earlier. So they're at a minimum are things you're going to have to do as an organization. So when you build this scorecard, and where the scorecard looks of, do we have, security awareness training going on? Do we have multi-factor authentication enabled? Do we have a password management tool? Do we actually have endpoint detection and response software? So EDR, if people haven't heard that term, people have heard antivirus software, but really the next generation of that is you have endpoint protection. So the software installed on the client, but it's being monitored on a 24/7 basis. And there is a response. So either automated response or people response to address what's occurring. And a lot of them are making that a requirement now. So a more proactive response mechanism. And again, there's partners, there's MSPs that offer this as a service. There's the software companies themselves offer it as a service. But these things are things that need to be on your scorecard. And these type of things that you could address that minimize your risk really quick over time. Like I said, I can't express enough multi-factor authentication. That is critical of getting implemented within your organization. And then some sort of a security awareness training. And there's a lot of technology around the security awareness training out there that do automated emails, right? that send you, and this again needs to be in layers, right? So people need to be seeing this information and getting used to it. It could be in newsletters, weekly newsletters, monthly newsletters. It can be in a form of videos that you get once a month from different tools. But if you don't have that in place, you could still address this through just education, simple education, new hires that come in, sitting down with that new hire and making security awareness a part of that onboarding. So, we do that even within my organization. Is a new person starts, doesn't matter who you are in the organization, that new employee, we're going to sit down with them and go through something similar to this slide deck, right? And educate them and, get them just ingrained in that. And then we're going to have a mechanism in place where we do it, and maybe at company meetings or roundtables or town halls, where we talk about security, and then newsletters. There's of course technology that you can put in place. If your organization can afford that, you can put technology to automate that. But if not, you can do things without technology, right? Through process and people. And, really with ending with this, before we get into Q&A, it's all about layers. So everything you do, and I like to use the term, what's that next one step, right? So you can't address all of this at once, as I said, which is the point of building a simple scorecard as an organization, is long as you are making progress in a positive direction, doing little different things, tweaking things, setting securities on shares, making sure that users that are no longer here are getting deleted, that you're doing education, that you implement things like MFA, right? That you're doing those things. It's, again, a journey, and it's about putting in multiple layers. The multiple layers that you put in place will continue to minimize your risk over time. And that's really what we could do. I've joked with boards around this is, security is, it's not only people, process, and technology, but sometimes it's also a little dumb luck. And security folks don't like to say that sometimes, but it's true. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when an incident will occur in your organization. Let it be an isolated individual incident or a large global security incident within your group. So the more things you can do to minimize the risk over time is critical. And this is where companies get paralyzed, right? There is too much to do, too much going on. And how do we attack this? And that's why if you could sit down and create, this is where we stand with a simple one-page scorecard and have a starting point, you could kind of see where you're at and start picking off things one by one. So I want to thank everybody for their time, and hopefully you get to take away a little tidbit from today. And I think we're going to turn it over and move into questions and answers.
Yes, thank you very much for that chocked full presentation. There's a lot of information in there, and we already have our first question that asked if we will have the slide deck available after the forum is over. The answer to that is yes. We will have the slide deck sent out to you along with a link to this presentation once the forum concludes. So that will be there. The theme that I feel I got from your presentation today, Brian, is this concept of layering people, processes, and technology on top of one another to make a really secure system for an organization, and that there was an emphasis on the people and processes, especially in smaller organizations that may not be able to buy into technology right away. I was wondering if you could go into the policies piece a little bit to talk through what types of policies an organization might look to and where we fit those into an overall strategy.
Sure. Yeah, and policies is another one that can be daunting, right? Within an organization. And again, sometimes regulations and different regulatory bodies will drive what policies you must have in place, right? As a group. But at a minimum, there should be some sort of acceptable use policy, right? That starts to outline what's the expectation of a user within your organization and what they can do, and it's one thing to have a policy, right? And then how do you adhere to that policy, right? How do you actually validate those things? But I would say from policies, a general acceptable use policy, mobile device policy, that's probably a remote user policy, of course, now with the remote workforce really being everywhere and the shift for a high majority of people working from home, having a remote workforce policy, expectations around, how they access, what type of devices they use, are starting to evolve. So I think those are ones. There's a lot of great templates out there that are free, to organizations to get to. Mobile device policy, I think I mentioned, that's a big one that you're seeing a lot of organizations start to implement, because a lot of organizations were forced to go to being device agnostic a little bit as well. Home users accessing their work from their home computers, right? Because not everybody had work computers at home, but yet they had to work from home, during the pandemic. So having those policies in place that really kind of outline the expectations of, if it's a personal device, the company isn't worried about seeing and everything that you're doing on your personal device. That usually used to be the biggest holdup, especially on mobile, like phones. When I talked about the mobile device management thing, software, is that people are like, well, I don't want you to be able to delete my pictures or see what I'm browsing and things like that. It's my personal phone, right? The message really has to be around protecting the company data, right? And you as an individual. So how do you do that in a way that's kind of in a shared environment and that it's not this scary thing, right? That's there. So a lot of it is about setting the expectations and letting people really understand, really being transparent about what you're doing, right? And the purpose of it. But those are some big policies: general use policy, remote workforce policy. I think data retention and backup policy, because that's what's going to drive you to make sure you understand that you're backing up your core data, right? So do you know, as an organization, that I back up my data daily, weekly? Where is it? Is it in the cloud? Is it on tape? Is it, where is it? Going through that process of that policy will kind of force you to make sure that you have those mechanisms in place. And again, these aren't about just having the policies. It's actually, what are you doing with them, right? How are you executing them? Because the policy is only as good as it is on paper, right? So it's what are you doing, with that policy?
I think that actually leads to really well to our next question around the scorecard. So we have all of these policies in place, and they're tucked away into our HR manuals and kind of put on a shelf, but the need to continue to check back on those and make sure that they are being implemented and enforced correctly. Can you talk about a little bit more about the security maturity scorecard, some examples of what content would be on there. And is there a model that you recommend for use, or is there an example of this that folks can find somewhere online?
Sure, good question. So let me start with the policies first. So the policies, I recommend as an organization that you put together a small little subcommittee. It could be 2 to 3 members, right? It could be HR, it could be finance, it could be IT, right? Have to, have representation in there, and that they are reviewing the policies on some sort of regular cadence. Let it be quarterly or annually, right? So that group is getting together, reviewing the policies together. Has anything changed, right? On that we need to change because of either business or maybe technology, that, or just, the environment has changed. So that they're going through those on that kind of basis. So setting up that group at least allows them to be reviewed, on a regular basis. I would recommend that you have then staff see them, sign off on them annually as well, right? So it should not only be new hires that are reviewing it. You should have something in place. And again, you don't need technology to do this. It's nice to have it, makes it easier, right? But you can have a policy that you can make sure that everybody is getting in their hands during review time, maybe, right? And they're getting reintroduced to it to understand the changes. So that's the policies and how I would handle those as an organization. The scorecard itself, the scorecards have evolved for me over time. I built some of these out. I spent a lot of years in consulting. I've spent a lot of years in very large, complex IT organizations. And it really came down to me of what are the core things that need to be on there. It's not the full encompassing, like if you were to do, some people might have heard of NIST or different frameworks, security frameworks that are out there that are very complex. It could be hundreds of pages of stuff. This is not that, right? This is to give you a quick glance at your organization of, are we doing the basics, right? Do you have, again, endpoint protection installed? Red, yellow, green, yes or no, right? Okay, I got this here. Do we have up to where it might have multi-factor authentication on there? Are you doing that, as an organization? Do you have email encryption, enabled? Are your workstations encrypted, right? Do you have, it steps up, there's data loss prevention tools, so and those are where I consider more mature, right? When you start getting to the mobile device management or data loss prevention tools, or certain tools are more mature in the security, but they're on there. And in some businesses, it's okay that those are red. They may never be green, right? You may not need to do, those kind of things. So backups are on there. Are you doing education training, quarterly, yearly, those it tries to keep it basic, high level. And then you underline it with your IT folks then could take it, right? They'll work with the business area and developing the scorecard. And a lot of different managed service partners have their own flavor of a scorecard, right? And they'll walk you through building it and, filling it out for you and stuff. But, I've, done a lot of just Googling, right? As well over the years. A lot of it's just experience, over the years. But you can go out there and Google IT security scorecards or maturity scorecards, and a lot of one-pagers will pop up. And the problem, what I find with some of those is, they're not full. Are they encompassing enough, or is it too little, right? Of information, and that's where it's hard. Sometimes they don't cover the people aspect, right? Are you doing the training and the policies? So you got to make sure you're kind of putting those in there. But you might have things like a cyber liability, and at a minimum, if you have a cyber liability insurance policy that you need to meet, those buckets that they call out should be on there, right? Do you have, again, MFA, right? Do you have a password management tool? Do you have endpoint protection, right? Those are things that you need to do, right? And you can just take those right from those documents and start populating your scorecard and then seeing, oh, do I have something in place to address that? And if not, okay, what do I do? Is that something I could do on my own because I have internal IT resources, or do I have to leverage a partner, in that space? So this isn't, this is where it's a little hard. Scorecard's not a perfect science, right? It's also security goes a lot of what is good enough, right? As I said, there's a lot of technology that's out there, and you could spend millions, right? On all these different technical solutions. But again, that's where it goes tech. You could have great technology and horrible process, right? And if you have horrible process, it doesn't matter what technology you have in place, in many cases, right? So what is good enough, right? So it's, as a smaller organization or a nonprofit type organization, they have to look at what's the biggest bang for the buck, right? What do I need to do to minimize my risk while maybe not spending a fortune? How do I ease into this, right? And that's where I think you could look at, again, it's, you either have the internal resources, I know IT resources to help, or you don't. But a partner can help you say, here's 3 options, right? Here's this technology out here. It could do everything you want. And, here's the cost associated to that. And you might be like, yeah, I can't do that, right? So leveraging technology that might already be in your organization. So Microsoft's a great example, right? A lot of people have Microsoft, in their environment. And a lot of times it's just a little uptick in your licensing that you have with Microsoft, and you get this security stack with it. Like, so you might get better endpoint protection, or maybe data loss prevention, or email security, these things that you could quickly turn on as a smaller organization without having the large price point of these independent individual third-party applications that are out there.
So it sounds a little bit like a good place for an organization to start would be to evaluate what you already have in-house and see if there's any way to use that to sort of beef up your security a bit. It may not be a matter of going out to find a new product or anything like that. It may just be a matter of figuring out what you already have.
Yes, exactly. And I would say that for everybody, and I don't know all the folks that are on here, and what roles they have. I'm sure there's a lot of different roles, of individuals that are on this call. This has to have leadership buy-in, right? If it does not have leadership buy-in, it is an uphill battle, within any organization to do a lot of these things. So I would say if there's leaders that are on this call, or if there's people that are in IT and they get influenced up, or even any department, HR, whoever within your organization, you have an influence to go up, the chain and talk about, hey, we need to do this, right? We need to sit down as a collective, as a group, right? This isn't an IT thing. This is an organization thing, right? We need to sit down, come up with something that we understand where our security posture really is at, right? And then it starts making it palatable, right? As I said, if you put this stuff down and you put it in a way that's not overly complex, you can start picking off these things as an organization. And as you do that, you mitigate your risk, right? Because it's about those layers. So that any one thing you can do to move forward continues to mitigate your risk, but allows it to put it in a way that the organization is all on the same page. They can pick what's important to them, because on this scorecard isn't going to be the same order as another company, right? Because of either where you're at or what you have or what your business is, you're going to learn really quick what's important to you, off of this. And that's what's going to drive that. But it's critical that is the starting point. The organization has to get together. They have to put together a scorecard of some sort of where they stand. And then that way they can move forward.
Wonderful. So before we move on, I wanted to ask you quickly to unshare your screen.
Okay.
Thank you. Sometimes folks ask us to do that so that it's easier to see our faces and mouths along with the closed captioning. And we have 2 questions about password management, software, systems, protocols. So one of the questions is around password management best practices. And can you also go into a little bit about how a password management system works?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so password management systems could be a couple different flavors. So they traditionally started within organizations for their IT department to store, passwords for their firewalls and their servers and, administrative type passwords. Well, that's quickly evolved, right, and shifted. As I said, individuals have so many passwords, right? You have different websites you go to, different applications you go to, and it's human nature to write them down, put them into a spreadsheet, put them somewhere that you could see them all, because you cannot remember them all in your head. And if the other extreme is the people are using the same password for every application, right? Which is another big no-no, because you do that, I crack one, I'm going to start trying other apps with that password and your email address or your common username. And so that's where I kind of talk about unique passwords, right? All your applications you need to make sure are unique. But as soon as you do that, you create the other problem of, how do I manage all these passwords, right? Because I have all these unique passwords. So a password management tool, I'll use the example of, I don't advocate any one technology, because there's a lot of them that are out there. But for this example, there's a product called Lastpass. So it's a tool, a lot of people have heard about it because some people already use it at home. But what it does basically is it's a web-based application that allows you to enter, any like website that you might go to that might have a URL, or it doesn't even have to be a website. It could be an application that's internal even, that you could just give it a name. You could put in the username that you use to log in. You can, if you can manually type in a password, in there, or you could tell it, there's a button in most of them that say auto-generate a password. So you could click on auto-generate, and it will create a very complex password where you're never going to remember, right? It creates a very long password. But then they have these plugins. So when you click on, say, a website, you go to, let's say, Amazon, you'll see the little plugin there by the username and password, and you could just click on it, and it will auto-populate the password for you and then log you in. So you don't even have to know the password. You don't have to remember it. A lot of people get nervous about, well, now I'm storing all my passwords in, this electronic format that's on the cloud. And that means, now if that gets breached, they have all my username and passwords, right? I hear that, right? And, is there a risk of password management companies getting breached? Sure, right? Like any company, but they're security companies, right? They have a lot of resources and a lot of dollars that they're putting towards it. I can guarantee their security is a lot more secure than you putting it on a spreadsheet and storing it on your network, right? Or having it on a piece of paper, somewhere. So you have to weigh the risks, right? Of what you're doing. A lot of these tools also allow for personal use and work use. So LastPass is a good example that when you get their licensing, it allows you, I can have all my home stuff and I can have all my work stuff. They're all segregated. You can set up rights. So if you're in an organization and you have to share, there's some common username and password. I mean, most practice is having a unique username and a password for every individual. But in some cases, there are still a shared password and username for certain aspects. And it has to be a shared, maybe a couple people. You could secure it, only these people see that. These applications allow auditing. So anybody that accesses any of this information, there's a history that I could see, oh, so-and-so accessed, this password. So this is even critical in the IT world a little bit more of when you have a lot of support people and they have access to different information, you could actually run a report and see, oh, that tech accessed only these. So I know we need to focus on only changing these, passwords versus everything. So it's really about, like I said, tools, and there's a lot of different tools of storing these usernames and passwords in a secure way, and then making it easily accessible to you when you need to use them. Costs of these have come down greatly with a lot of these, where it's a lot more palatable for an organization to implement it for everybody, in the organization. But I would say start at least with your IT department, start with maybe your finance, like core areas where they know, but you quickly learn most people in their day-to-day job access sensitive information right on, every day, no matter what role you're in. So that's why the password management tools become so important across the board. But there are actual incidents, documented incidents of companies getting breached and storing passwords in clear text in spreadsheets, and those getting compromised and causing havoc, right? Either stealing data or implementing ransomware within an organization. So this is a hard one because a lot of people think of, like I said, I don't need to do it. I can remember my passwords, or it's not really as important. You have the keys really at that point, right? It's having a ring of keys, as I said, I talked about the door lock, but having a ring of keys on your desk that has access to every door and just leaving it there, right? So, you have to think about it in a little bit different way and help educate your users, your general users, of the importance of securing that information.
The thing I think that you are conveying here that I really like is pairing this policy that you might have, or this educational key point of don't use the same password for everything, and make sure you use a passphrase as opposed to a password, and make sure that you use a unique identifier for each account. You're pairing that with a tool that makes it easier for staff to be able to comply with that request. So it's that layering again of not just asking people to do something, but also giving them a tool to be able to make it actionable. So I think that is really neat. We have a question about VPNs. Can you talk a little bit about VPNs?
Yeah, so VPNs have changed a lot again over the years, especially as more things have gone to, people hear the word cloud or software as a service or SaaS type models. There's going to be still cases where you might have on-premise type information where you want to use a VPN to make a secure connection from home to work. A lot of people are moving away from VPNs as well when they're going towards more of a, you might hear the term like zero trust, or people will use tools more of a single sign-on type solution. It's really gone, so where the things have shifted is really gone to identity and access management, right? So as you kind of heard me say, device agnostic and some of the mobile stuff. I mean, as people have moved to a remote workforce, it's really coming down to how they're accessing the information, who's accessing the information, what can they access, right? So this identity piece is what's becoming more critical. So controlling that piece, then you put everything behind that, right? And so you put all your tools, you put your applications behind that identity piece, and that's your security mechanism, right? That's kind of getting into, you don't get access to any of this stuff unless you go through that identity access level. And people might hear different. So Microsoft has a solution kind of for that, or some people hear Okta. That's a big one. That's kind of out there from a single sign-on identity management tool. But there's a few others in that space. So from a VPN, there are still instances of needing a VPN to make sure data is secure in transit. Because really, from a security perspective, you want to make sure data is secure in transit and at rest, right? And you have to be able to show how you're doing that in whatever kind of framework you do. But I've seen a lot of organizations either implement VPNs for certain aspects, depending on their need, but also move away from some of the VPNs by going to more of this identity and access layer and a zero trust layer, and how they implement what you could access, as an individual. And a lot of that is coming more into play with people working from home, right? Is now.
That's actually the question I was going to ask next regarding that. The single access sign-on and the zero trust kind of concept, does that do the job for our new remote work style, where we may be working from home, but we also may be working from co-working centers or coffee shops or on public networks? Does that do the job there as well?
Yeah, that's exactly the case, right? Because as I said, we already had people working from home, right? But when COVID hit, it became really overnight, right? With all these companies that had to work from home. And again, the risk there was, while they're accessing company information from home, and maybe we didn't have a security mechanism, in place of how we handled this, or they're using their assets, their home computer that, well, how do I know what's on that home computer? And, has that home computer been compromised? So there's other layers, of things in here, because, you could still have zero trust, and you could still have, this single sign-on. But if I'm doing it from a device that maybe is compromised in some way, how do I protect against that, right? And there are tools there, right, to look for certain things. Is that workstation up to date with antivirus software, or is it compromised in some other way? And if so, do this, right? Again, you could start getting very complex, and you could start getting very expensive, and those things. So I think it's how do you work into that environment, as an organization, because a lot of small to medium businesses, it's cost effective for them to be remote, right, and not have office space, right, and leverage those type of tools. I'm a big advocate of SaaS type software as a service type solutions, right? Because they build the architecture, they have the resources, to build out the security. I think you have to do your due diligence as, it doesn't just shift the ball, right? You don't have to worry about security or any of those things. You have to vet those partners and vendors and software companies a lot better now from their security posture as well, right? Taking them through, well, how are you securing your environment? How are you, like those types, how are you backing your data? Like those kind of questions, you need to ask those of them, but they have the resources and the economies of scale to do it where you might not.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We have just 2 more questions from the audience, and then I have some questions for you as well. One of them says, what are your thoughts? First, they want to say a bit of a shout out to say thank you for keeping it so simple, and they feel they're going to be able to educate the folks within their nonprofit much easier than they were before. Then they go on to ask a question around malware bites and what layer would you consider that? How would you protect against that?
So, well, malware bites the application or malware, right? So there's if you're talking malware bites, there's an application called malware bites, right? And the could look for malware, can't clean malware, those kind of things. I consider that as a, if you look at the scorecard, there's layers in there that you could put around, not only endpoint protection, but are there any other malware or ransomware type tools? Put in things like even secure DNS. So I know that's a lot of people know what's DNS, whatever, but so it's basically allows for, say you got ransomware, you got a link, you clicked on it, in your email, it prevents that communication, really making it all the way back to allow that payload to hit to encrypt the data on your workstation. So I would consider, malware bites, as another tool that's kind of listed. What am I doing around malware, right? Or endpoint protection. And you might list out a couple things that I'm doing there. I have, this antivirus software. I'm using malware bites, right? There to do this. So it would just be a layer in there on the endpoint side to me on having that.
Okay. And then we have another question around, you did start talking a bit about this actually, around the importance of leadership buy-in. And this question is about how to really position those conversations around risk appetite versus cost with your leadership team or with your board.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a challenge, right? In a lot of organizations, and it depends on the organization. And, I've been fortunate to be in a lot of organizations that have buy-in on technology, right? Or understanding the importance of it. A lot of this, our environment over the past couple of years has really pushed a lot of this too, right? It's in the media a lot more, a lot of things are occurring. So it's becoming a little bit more easier to have the conversation, in a group. But I would say that, the big things are, I think you kind of said it here, is you got to keep things simple, right? Where I've seen people fail is the tech folks, right? The IT department gets so technical, right? They're getting, we got to do this. And like, well, the leadership team doesn't understand what you're saying, right? Well, what does this really do for us, right? What risk does it really reduce, right? And that's where it goes into that scorecard concept a little bit more. I'm going to keep harping on that, is you got to put it visibly in a palatable way that both leadership and tech and, different areas understand it. And it helps lead to what's that good enough, right? That starts driving, I think when you put these things on the scorecard, it starts becoming very visible of, oh, well, we're not doing multi-factor. Okay, well, how do we implement that? We know that reduces risk by whatever, we could read that it reduces risk by 90%, right? Of how do we implement that? Or it might be, you're going to see really quick of, these are requirements, as I said, by cyber liability insurance. You might say, well, we can't even get cyber liability insurance, or we lied, on our policy to get it because we said we're going to do it, right? Kind of thing. Those are things that are going to drive must-haves versus, yes, we'd like to do these, over time. Like I said, you're not going to do all these in 1 year, right? Typically, right? These are maybe you do, but they're on certain ones. But there's ones that take a little time. Changing culture, that doesn't happen overnight, right? Educating people, that takes time, right? That takes your approach. and everybody's organization's culture is different, right? So how do you get through to remote users versus users that you could just go talk to in person, right? How do you do those things? So I think showing the value, you have to have the group talking a common language. Hopefully they could do through the scorecard, where it alleviates technology versus, tech talk versus, business process and value. And then getting them to work together and saying, okay, here's the things that we think. You could start putting solutions behind those, right? And that starts leading to, here's the cost of us doing them on our own. Here's a cost of going with a partner where maybe they could bundle, some of these things together, right? It starts building the cost model for you. It makes the conversation easier, right? And I've been able to take this document to the CFO, right, or to the CEO, or and have that conversation and show which ones we recommend that we should do first, right, as a group, and that starts building it out. But because if you start looking at it, we got to answer all this at once, again, you become paralyzed, right? So it's really walking through what's good enough, what are the things you have to do versus what are nice to haves that continue to minimize other risks, right?
Yeah. So, I think you echoed what was happening in my brain, that, approaching it in a staged way, especially if you're at zero securities right now, going from zero to absolute information Fort Knox may not be the best way to secure buy-in of your entire team, but laying a plan for how you want to get there and what your insurance policies require and things like that might be a really good way to build a plan for where you want to be. We are all out of time, and I had a question for you about cybersecurity insurance, which I will reserve for another conversation with you. But thank you so much for joining us today. This was an excellent forum. I think it's something that we don't talk enough about. We're taken with all of our daily responsibilities, and sometimes it requires us taking a step away from that to really consider how secure are we in our workplace. So thank you for bringing that to us. We are going to be sending the folks who attended this forum and the folks who RSVP'd an email afterwards, which contains a link to this YouTube video once it's posted there. It will also contain the slides to this forum. Thank you for providing those, Brian. And it will contain a survey for you that helps us know how we're doing. So please do take some time to fill out that survey and help us know whether we're giving you content that's meaningful for you, and suggest other types of content that you would like to see. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.